are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
All right, Storm Tracker podcast here. John Garcia there, and we are representing rivals.com and also canescounty.com. I do want to let you guys know of a special promotion that we have going on. It's for the kickoff of football season, kickoff 2023, where you can get 60% off your annual subscription. And John, we're here. We're here in football season, and recruiting is starting to ramp up a bit. We're getting closer and closer to signing day. You and we were at a high school football game last night. Milton took on Western, and we got a chance to see the Miami commit Luke Nickel, the 4-star out of Milton. And unfortunately, he came up a little bit short when it comes to the end result of the game. But just kind of seeing him, his mechanics, and just how he was on the field, which weren't great conditions, by the way. What did you think of his performance?
Yeah, I like my first in-person impression of Luke. First of all, I think the frame is where you start the conversation. This is a kid who is legitimately 6'2 plus, over 200 pounds, and carries it really well. This is a kid who's hit the weight room in his high school career, not just a finesse quarterback that's in the background here. So I think the build kind of struck me, in person, seeing him slinging it. You're seeing it there on the screen. Definitely one of the bigger quarterbacks, relative to that junior class. And then despite the conditions, look, wet, humid, hot, all of those things, I thought he was really consistent mechanically, whether he was in the pocket or moving outside the pocket. I thought he displayed that sort of classic three-quarter delivery that really you want all your quarterbacks to operate with. I know we get into this, dropped arm angle Patrick Mahomes thing, but those are rare cases. We don't want to see that really in high school. We want that classic delivery, and I think the speed with which it comes out is also impressive there with Nickel, and he was consistently under duress in this game. He had to move out of the pocket probably more than he wanted to. You see the touchdown here on the 7-cut, high-lowing that cornerback who was in underneath coverage. I mean, that's exactly the timing and touch you want with that football. And that's really where I came away more impressed with Luke. I know it's a conservative offense that's going to run to set up the pass, and there was a lot of short to intermediate stuff. But when he did get the opportunity to push it to the third level, I thought he was really sharp. The timing and touch on those deep balls were really strong. There were probably a couple that should have been caught by his wide receivers. But like you saw on that touchdown pass, I mean, he is really on time when he has the ability to step into his throws, but enough arm strength to operate when he's on the move or not able to step into those throws. So I just thought, to have a turnover-free game against a good defense in that setting after whatever it was, a 12-hour bus ride, I thought was pretty impressive. And likewise for Luke, sort of standing in the paint, talking to all of the media afterwards, right? I mean, you're the quarterback, you got to deal with that. But I was actually impressed with how he handled that part of it there as well. So not the greatest numbers. Neither quarterback put up great numbers, but I thought the mechanics, the foundation, the toughness, and that deep ball, really caught my attention.
Yeah, I thought he was really impressive as well as far as his poise in the pocket, as well as in the interview. Like you mentioned, I thought he was very polished. I thought he got the ball out quickly. I think his offensive line didn't do him any favors, and neither did his wide receivers do him any favors in this game. I think some of the receivers kind of quit on routes and dropped some key footballs, especially that last one in the fourth quarter that actually won the game for Milton. I think he has a ton of potential. I think Miami did well with securing his commitment as a 2025 prospect, and I think the sky's the limit for these kids because he's got the mechanics to really be a high level quarterback. So I'm excited for his future, and I actually put together a piece on CanesCounty.com, really talking about how his relationship with offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson. He's keeping communication with him on a weekly basis, or kind of on a daily basis, as they text a lot. So he's working with him to try to improve his game at a really early age. And like I said, the sky's the limit for this kid out of Milton. But he was playing with a tight end who is also interested in Miami, in Ryan Ghea. We finally got his name right. We were calling him Ghea or whatnot, but Ryan Ghea is a really nice looking prospect, also out of Milton, of course, and he's interested in Miami. What were your thoughts on him?
Again, you're always curious to see the size of these kids in person, right? Because we see, online there's a lot of flubbing going on, but let me tell you, Ryan G, all of 6'5", 230 plus pounds, or whatever he's listed at, absolutely looks the part as that sort of classic tight end, but he's still got some room to fill out, So I think he could be a little bit more modern than maybe even we saw on Friday night against Western. But look, they use him very much in a classic sense. He's on the end of the line of scrimmage. He's blocking a good bit, and then they work off of that. So shallow screens, throwbacks, drags across the formation. He's got some kind of old school tight end roles within that Milton offense. So you do like that. You want to see balance there because, again, in the modern sense, everybody likes these jumbo tight ends that don't block, and they're basically just big wide receivers. But in a lot of college offenses, there's still very much a need for that balanced tight end who can actually get after it as a blocker. So I thought G was really solid there. And when he had his opportunities in the passing game, I thought he did pretty well. He's obviously a massive kid, so it takes him a minute to get going, but he made a couple defenders miss in the open field, and he showed some toughness too. There was one ball that Nickel put a little bit behind him, and G had to adjust to it, against the defender, the defender's blind side. So he knew a big hit was coming right at the first down marker, but he hauled it in, even though he caught the ball away from his body and absorbed that contact. So I just think he's got a lot of really classic tight end traits, which is kind of refreshing, right? We see all of these, Caleb Odoms that are 6'5", 6'6", and they never line up with their hand in the dirt. They're basically wide receivers until they get to college. So it's good to see the opposite, a true balanced high school tight end with still, almost 2 years left of high school ball. So you understand why a lot of colleges have jumped in early on Ryan G for sure.
One of those colleges is the University of Miami. We do have a story that will be on CanesCounty.com shortly on his process and just, Miami's connection with him. He is looking to visit this year and will likely be accompanied by Luke Nickel on the trip. John Garcia here with me, national recruiting analyst for Rivals.com. On a Rivals Friday, and Saturday is going to be a big day for the Miami Hurricanes as far as recruiting is concerned. They are in contention for 2 5-star players in Zaquan Patterson and David Stone. Miami's been kind of in recruiting race for both of these guys from the beginning, it seems. And it's now come down to decision day for both of these guys. Let's start with Zaquan Patterson, the local safety from Chaminade, Madonna. Now, we've heard a lot about Florida State jumping in the mix. You wrote a piece on Rivals.com on basically what you thought about Florida State involvement or recruitment of Zaquan Patterson. Where do you think he goes, or what school do you think he ends up choosing on Saturday?
Yeah, this one has been truly back and forth. First of all, Zaquan wasn't necessarily ready to shut things down this early, according to him. He was really back and forth on trying to create a timeline for a decision, but naturally, a lot of recruits want to get this thing done in August before the bulk and the thick of their senior season. So you understand that. I think he's really the last senior at Chaminade among the elites that is uncommitted at this point. So I think that created kind of a logjam, right? He didn't get to execute his visits a certain way, and he took 0 officials to this point. So I do think that there could be a lot of intrigue beyond Saturday, but going into it, for a long time, we've really kind of latched on to Miami as the long-term favorite for
Right.
Zaquan, and a lot of other programs have pushed for that second spot. I think Michigan probably did the best job in the spring, and then into the summer is when we started to hear more about Florida State and even a sprinkle of Auburn at different points with Zaquan. So I think leading up to the actual commitment come Saturday afternoon, I think he's going to do it at the game at halftime, by the way. I think it's more of a traditional Miami versus Florida State type battle. And the momentum FSU has created over the last few weeks, I think has been tough for anybody to match, including Miami. So I do think the buzz and that trajectory is really positive for Florida State. But I just get the sense that this thing's far from over, whether it's about the drama heading into Saturday or especially beyond. I just can't envision whoever finishes second on Saturday just stopping the recruiting process for a 5-star safety that, as you can see on these highlights, does everything on the football field. I mean, Chaminade's got elite football players across the board, but in terms of the best football player who does the most, anybody there will tell you it's Zaquan Patterson. So that type of value is something that we know Mario Cristobal covets. We know Mike Norvell covets. We know Auburn, Michigan, Ohio State, those schools aren't going to slow down for a prospect like this. So I'm fascinated to see, of course, where he goes Saturday. And I do lean towards Florida State over Miami, but I'm also just as curious to see what happens after that point, especially with all of those official visits still available.
I totally agree. I think this recruitment is far from over, even though he is making his decision Saturday, and he will, have a destination, I guess you could say, so to speak, on his profile. I don't think this is over by any stretch. Miami has been notorious, I guess you could say, for pushing for guys after they're committed. They're still pushing for Jeremiah Smith, Zaquan's teammate. So I do not think this is over by any stretch if he indeed does pick the Seminoles here. But I did want to ask you something, John, since you are the Southeast analyst here. Why do you think Florida State is able to kind of build this class the way they have? And it seems it could get even better now with the addition of Patterson. What is it that they're doing, or are you getting a sense of what they're selling to the kids in order for them to build up the class that they have right now?
Well, look, when you have a program that is sort of offensive laden over some time, eventually when that starts to apex, it creates a desire for the defense to sort of match it. And I think in recruiting, there's a few schools nationally that have done a really good job of saying, we got offense. Come help us get better every day defensively. I look at USC. I look at Tennessee. I certainly am now looking at Florida State as one of these programs. Ohio State's another great example as well, to where you're starting to see a little bit more galvanization for these defensive classes at schools that we expect to be a little bit more top heavy on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you look up at Florida State, and from a secondary perspective, you could argue with or without Zaquan Patterson, they may have the best secondary group in the country verbally committed. KJ Bolden, Charles Lester, Ricky Knight is another South Floridian. I mean, they've got a great class already assembled. And there's this sense in Tallahassee that they're right there, that Florida State is right there on the verge of maybe an ACC title, certainly a college football playoff appearance. There's just this sense that in the state, they are running away with things from a perceptional standpoint. And I hate to bring it up on a Miami podcast, but that matters. When you're talking about teenagers, that perception of who is king right now in the state on the field really does matter in this great state of Florida. And you could hardly argue that at least going into 2023, that post is held by Florida State. And I think the offensive success has led to more defensive intrigue and eventually defensive success from a recruiting standpoint with that coaching staff up in Tally.
I can certainly see that. I think the success is something that these kids are seeing. The fact that Florida State is being projected to possibly win the conference and on some platforms to make the college football playoff. So I can see where Florida State is just kind of taking advantage of that recent success and really kind of selling it to kids. What Miami's angle is that Zaquan in particular can play early because we're pretty much expecting Cameron Kitchens and James Williams to have great seasons in 2023 and then move on to the next level. So that would give a Zaquan Patterson an opportunity to play early. So I think they're going to continue to try to sell that point from now until signing day, but we'll see if that actually works for the Hurricanes. But the other 5-star player that is in contention, obviously, is David Stone, the monster defensive tackle out of IMG Academy. This is a guy who's at a position of need for any football team, right? And Miami's got a couple of defensive tackles committed in Dalen Russell, who's got a ton of potential, and Artavius Jones, who is just a freak athlete and a really nice young man. I had a chance to speak to him at the Miami barbecue. But David Stone's recruitment has been an interesting one as well. Oklahoma always has been perceived as the favorite here. He's originally from Oklahoma, and I think we all kind of just assumed it was going to be the Sooners. But as of late, it seems like Miami is making a push. But how realistic is it to think that the Hurricanes can land the 5-star from IMG?
Yeah, see, this one, it feels just like the Patterson recruitment, except Miami is the team starting to surge as opposed to that long-term favorite. And that's the position you want to be in at this point. I know David is incredibly aware of what we do. He's aware of crystal balls and forecasts and futurecasts and RPM picks, and he knows the entire country is expecting Oklahoma. So could this be showmanship from David, or is Miami legitimately closing this gap with Oklahoma? Let's look into some context. From the Oklahoma perspective, they've been building up to this class, and it was supposed to be this total overhaul from a defensive line standpoint. But some of those pieces didn't quite come together for the Sooners beyond Stone's IMG teammate, Jaden Jackson, you see there with the hair. He did commit to Oklahoma, but they missed on a couple other really big fish that Stone and others thought would be in the fold at this point. So from their perspective, he was going to be the finishing touch, the final piece to that puzzle with several other elite recruits. Just hadn't worked out that way. As to why it hasn't worked out that way, who knows? But there's clearly some doubt in what Oklahoma's been able to do from a defensive recruiting standpoint, even though they've got the defensive head coach and Brent Venables and some great positional recruiters underneath him. And then on the other side of it with Miami, David has just this desire to be around the Canes. I remember when I was at Media Day at IMG last summer. So I believe this was right after Francis Mauigoa committed. They had just brought in a couple other Miami commits to IMG, and there was this whole IMG pipeline talk going down with the U. that day, David Stone was like, man, I don't have that offer. And I really want it. And naturally, Miami heard that and certainly offered shortly thereafter. And from that point, there's been this pull that Miami has had with David Stone. They've got him on campus a bunch. He's coming down to Coral Gables a bunch of times to hang out with his former IMG teammates. There is a real sense that that pipeline is something that matters to him, not in terms of just the position and the numbers, but the fact that a lot of those other guys are offensive linemen. That's something that he resonates with as a defensive lineman trying to get better. And he credits Maui Goa in particular as one of those guys that really helped him become this 5-star top 10 recruit that he is at this point. So Miami for the last year has slowly climbed up the list for David Stone. And then just like we said with Florida State for Zaquan, coming into the decision on Saturday, Miami's really starting to feel a lot more confident. And Oklahoma at the same time is starting to worry just a little bit more. So I do feel like when it gets chaotic, you kind of go back home. So I do feel like Oklahoma is still the slight favorite and is the school that needs to be talked about first in this conversation. But there is zero doubt that Miami has made this 100% interesting. David admitted at this year's IMG Media Day that Miami was the school buzzing with Oklahoma the most. He admitted that those commits at Miami are on him as much as, or those players, as much as Oklahoma and Michigan State and some of the other contenders for him. But he's another one that he's got some wrinkles. He's talking about taking visits. He's talking about extending this thing beyond the verbal commitment. So he's another one. And you understand it as a 5-star to where this thing may not be over. So Miami being in second place for one or both of these guys isn't going to be good enough for the Miami fan base today or going into Saturday. But when you think of the long haul leading into mid-December and that early signing period, second place is not a bad place to be if kids are still keeping their options open. And there's no doubt that Miami is going to stay on David Stone, whether he commits to the Canes or not.
Yeah, I don't think Hurricanes fans kind of want to hear that at all, because I think it was Talladega Nights when they said, if you're not first, you're last.
That's true on signing day, not on August 26th.
You're right. And I do think this is a recruitment that is going to continue as well, because from what I understand, he's also looking to visit Alabama as well as a possibility. And also, I think you shared this with me, was that Brett Venables kind of has the rule of not letting his commits or his top recruits really visiting other schools while committed. So I think that kind of plays a factor. Of course, Miami doesn't have that as a rule. And the other factor that I'm hearing is that the NIL factor, that is a factor, whether we admit it or not. It certainly is. And Miami's been one of those schools that certainly promotes the opportunity for NIL options more so than a lot of other schools. And I would say more so than on Oklahoma. So how much do you think that plays a factor? Those two aspects take a factor here. The fact that he wants to visit other schools and NIL.
Yeah, that's a great point, Marcus. He told me that the Alabama D-line coach is actually the coach who's been bugging him the most lately, because they've never gotten a visit out of Stone, and we're in a dead period until September, even though Stone's committing tomorrow. So the tea leaf says, well, if he's going to commit Saturday and still take visits, he's not committing to Oklahoma, because yes, Brent Venables brought over that Clemson, our commits don't make visits elsewhere policy. So either one or two things have happened there. He's committing to another school, which would probably be Miami, or two, because he is this ballyhooed 5-star top 10 kid from Oklahoma, he's going to be the one Oklahoma commit who gets the benefit of the doubt and is allowed to take other visits, because, until you get to the school, the recruit runs the show. And I think this would be a strong example of that if he does pick Oklahoma. But I do think the NIL front is huge. And I also think the geographical front is huge. When he moved to IMG Academy and stayed again for his senior season, you're 3.5 hours away from Coral Gables. We talked about how frequently he went down there. And I should have mentioned that even folks from back in Oklahoma, like Mom, who's always important in these recruitments, kind of fallen in love with Miami a little bit. They all know what Oklahoma provides. It's home for them forever. So a true contrast to that is Coral Gables, South Florida, Miami, the ACC, all of it. And it's something that not only Stone, but those around him have gravitated towards. So I do think that's an important factor, especially when you talk about NIL, because a lot of that has to do with your opportunities where you're at, the weather,
Sure.
the type of products you can endorse, all of that could factor in. And David has sort of embraced this Miami, I would say, lifestyle to a degree without being a verbal commitment. So I think NIL plays a weave into all of those theories, and is part of the reason why, again, Miami has so much buzz and growing confidence going into the end of David Stone's recruitment, again, whether it's the commitment itself or certainly wherever he signs in December.
Yeah, it should be an interesting Saturday for sure. Miami's trying to continue pipelines with both IMG Academy and Chaminade Madonna. Chaminade Madonna is one of the teams that will be focused, or one of the teams featured in the Broward versus the World uh, games this weekend, and they will take on St. Francis. We've got St. Thomas also taking on St. John Bosco, and then American Heritage against St. John. So it's basically Broward County versus the Saints out here. And we'll see what happens at the end of the day Saturday. It starts off, of course, with Chaminade versus St. Francis. What are you excited about the kind of with that game, and what kind of matchups do you kind of see in this one?
Yeah, I think both teams had such a marquee opener that I think taught us something. Obviously, Chaminade just destroyed Miami Northwestern, which we thought offensively they could overpower Northwestern, and they did. But I think the surprise is defensively shutting out a program like that always has speed, always has skill position talent. I thought was interesting. Everyone's going to talk about Chaminade's offense, but this Zaquan Patterson led defense with Man and Chris Ewald and these other players, they showed up just as much. And they're not going to be as one-dimensional maybe as a lot of us thought going into this fall. And then conversely, St. Francis, they had another physical opener against Buford High School down in Georgia, and they got shut out. Which was a huge surprise. Michael Van Buren, the quarterback's committed to Oregon, legitimate dual threat. You just didn't expect them, even against a great Buford team, to go out there and lay an egg, and that's what happened. So I think this game has the opportunity to maybe be the best of the three games on Saturday, because St. Francis, talent-wise, is similar to Chaminade just in terms of Power 5 players, and coming off of that offer, they're going to come out guns a-blazing offensively, and we know Chaminade can match that, but now all of a sudden this defense has become sort of the storyline for the Lions there as well. So I think that game in particular has a chance to maybe be the best one and the most evenly matched one of these three on Saturday. But you got to give the advantage to the Broward schools, man. 2-0 after Thursday. I think they're favored in both games Friday as well. So Broward did a great job last year, and they're off to a heck of a start this year too.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the Chaminade St. Francis game as well. I think Chaminade will find a way to win. I think just kind of being used to South Florida heat, because it's going to be a scorcher as it was.
Yeah, that's a noon game. That's the first thing we should have said.
Yeah, it's going to be a scorcher, and kids from Baltimore, I don't think they are used to the humidity that they will feel at a noon kickoff. So plenty of Miami Hurricanes commits and targets throughout here. I'm excited to see JoJo Trader here. I think a lot of platforms are kind of wanting to see more from JoJo in this year because we didn't see much of him in the off season to kind of solidify, I guess, his 5-star status. So I think he knows that, and I think he wants to put the world on notice. This is a game that's going to be televised on ESPN, so the world will see how great of a player that he is, and of course JJ, Jeremiah Smith is, I think, by far and away the best overall athlete in this class, or maybe in all of college football. I mean, high school football, college football soon. Who knows? But yeah, I'm excited to see him as well. And then in the St. Thomas games, you got OJ Frederic, who I think is going to have a coming out party as far as what he can do. And I'm interested to see what Chance Robinson and Ryan Mack can do as well. You got 3 Miami commits on that St. Thomas team, and St. John Bosco's got plenty of firepower themselves. So it would be impressive for St. Thomas to pull off that victory against a team that's always in consideration for a national championship as of late. And then the final game, you got a Malachi Tony, who just recently committed to Miami, young prospect, 2026, but definitely a big name to watch over the next couple of years. He kind of made a name for himself last year in this showcase on ESPN. So I think he's due for an encore performance here, and he's a guy that can possibly reclass as well. I think that's something to kind of watch for the future. But excited to kind of see him and what American Heritage can do. Overall, American Heritage has a ton of young guys that Miami is looking at. They're an overall young team, from top to bottom. But St. John's is a team that has beaten South Florida teams before. They beat Miami Central a couple of years back. So should be an exciting Saturday. But I'm gonna pick up Broward County sweep on that day, just because, But we'll see what happens.
That's bold. That is bold. I think they win more than they lose for sure. But Bosco, I think, is its own animal. But hey, few teams will be as well coached and prepared as St. Thomas. That front seven, really the whole defense is ready to rock. So that game could be low scoring. I think that game could be sort of like what we saw last night between Milton and Western. So I think that would play into STA's favor, and obviously the weather. I think as that game stays close going into the second half, it really starts to favor St. Thomas, because you're talking about 94, 95 degrees, and no disrespect to Los Angeles, but they don't get anything like that relative to the humidity on top of it. So I do think the second half is where STA has to close the gap against Bosco. But you want to talk about talent, that game's got a lot of Saturday and probably some Sunday guys playing in it.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. John Garcia, ladies and gentlemen, he is the national recruiting analyst for the Southeast region for Rivals.com, covering Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. Thank you for joining me once again for a Rivals Friday.
Always a pleasure.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Once again, make sure you take advantage of the promo that we're running this weekend, Kickoff 2023, where you can get 60% off your annual subscription. That's for both CanesCounty.com and the national site, Rivals.com. That's going to wrap it up again for the Storm Tracker podcast. Until the next episode.